So good morning already, everybody. Just to say that we are still waiting for people to come in, as there are quite many today that want to come in. So that's why it takes a little bit time, but we will start in a few minutes. So thank you for your patience already. I think we should also let the people online in, just not that they don't think nothing is happening today. So good morning, everybody. I think we should start already by the introduction. Now, slowly, not that we have 1.5 hours, but nevertheless, I think let's start. And welcome to our intergroup on the case for a fur-free Europe. So last May, over 80 organizations launched a European Citizens Initiative, so an ECI, to end fur farming in the European Union, as well as the placement of fur on the European market called Fur-Free Europe. Currently, over 400,000 European citizens have already signed this initiative, and I have no doubt that by May next year, because as you know, we have 1 year for an ECI, that in May next year we are going to have over 1 million signatures. The success of this initiative will be paramount for the inclusion of a ban on fur farming in the future animal welfare regulation. For too long we have heard the call to end this cruel practice, and today we will hear from various speakers who will share their knowledge, experience in relation to fighting the good fight of fur-free Europe. So today we are joined, and I'm very happy to welcome Mrs. Reineke Hammelers on behalf of the Fur-Free Europe ECI. We have also Mrs. Rebecca Capilli, director of the documentary SLAY. We have Mr. Bo Algers, professor emeritus at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. And we have also a video message from the Federal Minister of Social Affairs and Health Care and Consumer Protection from Austria. So we will first listen to the presentation as well as view an excerpt from the documentary SLAY before opening up the floor, of course, also for questions and answers. Following that, my colleague Anja Hazekamp is going to join us here still in the plenary right now, and she will propose also a working group of the intergroup on the Fur-Free Europe, so of this European Citizen Initiative. Before that, just some practical aspects for the running of this session. The meeting is live streamed on Interaxio, and the meeting will be recorded, and the video recording and presentation will then be uploaded to the intergroup website afterwards. So now I see that our visitors, most of them are in, so welcome again in this intergroup to speak about Fur-Free Europe, a fight that we're going to win together. And now I give, without losing some more time, the floor to Mrs. Hammelers, who will present the case for a Fur-Free Europe. Reineke, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tilly. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the initiators of Fur-Free Europe, which is supported by over 80 animal protection and environmental groups, I'm delighted to present to you today the case for a fur-free Europe. Indeed, as Tilly mentioned, in 2020 we saw the incredible success of the ECI and the cage age, and the commitment of the European Commission to end the use of cages in livestock farming. Now, we believe that such a ban needs to be extended to fur animals, so the EU will move to a cage-free future for all animals and show real leadership. And we believe that with the revised animal welfare legislation coming up, we have a critical window to make this happen. So on the occasion of this intergroup meeting, we are launching a new report, and you may have already picked one up. It's really capturing all the evidence on why we believe it's high time for a fur-free Europe. Next slide, please. Indeed, every age has its massive blind moral spots. We might not see them, but our children will. And this quote perfectly reflects that fur farming undoubtedly belongs to one of these massive blind moral spots. But things must change, and I would like to summarize the 5 main reasons why we no longer see a future for fur farming, nor for its imported products. Firstly, as you know very well, and as we will sadly witness today, fur farming is one of the cruelest industries of our times. Next slide, please. This is because it mainly exploits wild animals such as mink, foxes, and raccoon dogs. And these species are not domesticated, and they suffer greatly in the barren wired cages that are fundamentally unsuitable for them to display their natural behaviors. And regardless of what the fur industry is saying, that these animals, have adapted themselves, that is just not true. To give you an example, in nature, mink have territories ranging from 1 to 3 square kilometers. They are solitary animals. They love to swim, to dive, to hunt. In the fur industry, mink live in wire mesh battery cages, as you see on this slide, of this size. Can you imagine? Of this size. Mink live in close quarters with other mink. And clearly, they cannot swim, hunt, nor dive. And much in the same way, there isn't any species kept by the fur industry whose needs are met, be it a chinchilla or rabbit. And we will hear more about this incredible animal suffering from Professor Emeritus Bo Algers later today, but of course also from Rebecca. Next slide, please. If inherent animal suffering weren't enough, the many outbreaks of COVID in mink farms put the spotlight on the very concrete risks to public and veterinary health that this industry causes. And I'm sure you will all remember the many serious outbreaks in 9 European member states and beyond, which prompted governments to take drastic measures. Next slide, please. And this prompted the leading health authorities, the WHO, WOHA and FAO, to confirm the link between COVID and fur animals. And I quote, "Public health risks from SARS-CoV-2 spill over within fur farms, from fur farms to humans and to wildlife populations are high in Europe, considering the high number of fur farms concentrated in the same geographical areas." I think the evidence couldn't have been clearer. And then also, next slide please, partially as a response to this crisis, the majority of EU countries spoke out against fur farming and presented a landmark declaration at last June's Agri-Fish Council meeting. And this paper called on the European Commission to investigate the possibility of introducing an EU-wide ban on fur farming on the basis of animal welfare, but also veterinary public health and ethical considerations. Next slide, please. Then third, fur farming is damaging to the environment. Far from being natural and sustainable, as is portrayed by the fur industry, fur production is intensely polluting. Several chemicals considered hazardous agents are related to fur dressing and dyeing processes, but also local bodies of water, groundwater, soil and air quality are extremely affected by the toxic substances produced by fur farms. And then, as I just said, fur farms are usually concentrated in certain regions, and their presence is drastically affecting also the quality of life of residents there. And if this wasn't enough, fur farming also has a devastating effect on biodiversity. Next slide, please. The business is to blame for the existing threatened status, and some cases even the extinction of European native wildlife, because American mink and raccoon dogs, which are the main species for fur farming in the EU, they are considered invasive alien species, and they are amongst the 18 mammal species, alien mammal species, of most concern in Europe. So in recent years, we have seen a growing concern about the impact of fur farming on the biodiversity. And this House expressed that concern in its report on the biodiversity strategy for 2030, and in that respect also adding to the debate about the future of fur farming. Moving on to the fourth main reason. Next slide, please. Fur farming has undoubtedly become one of the most controversial industries during the last decades. We have seen heated debates for a very long time now. And next slide, please. Surveys, polls, but also purchasing habits only show one very clear result. An overwhelming majority of European citizens reject fur farming. You see here the results in several countries. And this trend has luckily also led to the implementation of diverse legislative measures in 20 member states now. So 20 member states have introduced some sort of prohibition on fur farming, and I will come back to that in a moment. And then fifth, and this is not unimportant, next slide please, there is no economic case. The sharp decline in turnovers of the fur industry observed already before the pandemic was accelerated by the closing of fur farms on public health grounds. But even before this, the industry has been in constant decline since 2014, when we saw a peak. For example, mink production has fallen from 45 million animals in 2014 to an estimated 12 million in 2021. So this is a huge, huge decline. Next slide, please. And while we believe that the closing of fur farms is important for many reasons, as I just outlined, we also believe it's important to consider all these socioeconomic impacts. And as we have seen in several member states who already took action in the form, for example, of introducing a ban, it is clear that people who are depending on the fur industry for their income need some sort of support, for example, in the form of economic compensation. And we also know that this can perfectly be done. And I'm pleased to say that our member organization in Finland, Animalia, has just produced a report on how the Finnish government, in this respect, could support the remaining producers. But we really believe that the intense decrease in turnovers of fur farms since 2020 due to temporary or definitive bans has paved the way now for an EU-wide ban with adequate compensatory measures. Because taking together all the problems, investing in business transition is really the only way forward. Such a decision would not only bring the benefit of putting this cruel industry in the past, but it would also give new possibility to producers to align their new business to the ambitions in the Green Deal, in the farm-to-fork strategy, but also align their business with the United Nations Development Goals. And in this way, one can much better contribute to the future of vibrant rural areas. Now, how can we make this happen? Next slide, please. During the last decades, as I said, the lack of adequate measures at EU level have prompted member states to take action themselves. So we have seen in 20 countries legislative measures such as full or partial bans, but also stricter rules. And all this legislation has been adopted on different grounds. And this has led to a strong market divergence between national laws on fur farming. And issues regarding this type of divergence normally fall under Article 114 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the Internal Market. And sorry for becoming a bit more technical now, but I think it's important to explain how we can make it happen once we have collected the 1 million signatures. So we see this big patchwork in the EU. And now the Commission is working on revision of the animal welfare legislation. And this revision is expected to be based on Articles 43 on agriculture and Article 114 on the functioning of the internal market. And this provides the European Commission with the tools to propose legislation in order to harmonize national rules concerning the establishment and functioning of the internal market. And when it comes to fur farming, we believe that the only effective solution will be maximum harmonization, and this means a full ban. Now, linked to this, or on top of this, the European Commission is currently also considering how to make sure that imported products will comply with the new European animal welfare standards. And we also call that, since the French presidency, the mirror clauses, which was a great initiative. Because such an approach would strengthen the case for a ban on the placing of fur products on the European market, and I'm referring to farmed fur products in this respect. And we should also bear in mind that such an approach will really can count on the support of over 90% of European citizens who indicated in a Eurobarometer that they want to see such a ban on imported products too. So in short, an EU-wide ban entailing both a production and a sales ban of farm fur products would reinforce the so-called European added value to the renewed animal welfare legislation, emphasizing the relevance and significance of acting at EU level rather than at the national level. Wrapping up, next slide please, last slide. On behalf of Fur-Free Europe, we call on your help to make fur history. Fur is unnecessary, it is cruel, it is unsustainable, and it poses a threat to public health. And clearly there is no economic case to make anymore. The time has never been more right to put fur farming behind our backs. And together we can now add this piece to the puzzle we are painstakingly building, one of a better future for animals and humans alike. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you, Reineke, for this excellent presentation and this very holistic view, and also by starting all the reasons that we have to really ban fur in Europe, but also you propose solution, concrete solution, without neglecting the people working in this sector right now. So thank you very, very much for this excellent presentation again. I will now give the floor to Mrs. Capilli, who will share with us her story and why she is in favor of Fur-Free Europe. And we will also look at the video. You have the floor, Ms. Capilli. Thank you for being with us this morning.
There you go. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I think as a collective, we are facing many challenges, and I think we can agree that the climate crisis is at the top of the priorities that we must address. I believe that the climate crisis is actually a reflection and a direct consequence of an ethical crisis and how we treat life on this planet. My name is Rebecca Capilli. I am a filmmaker. I directed and produced Slay, which is a feature documentary investigating the skin trade in 7 countries. This is the work of 3.5 years. And when it comes to the fur industry, I investigated fur farms in China as well as on European fur farms. So, and I will just take this chance to mention that what I have found in China and in Europe is very comparable. If anything, some of the conditions that we have found on European fur farms actually was worse than some of the farms that I've seen in China. So, as a filmmaker, there are a few things that I could not put in Slay. Slay is meant for a really wide audience. And the first thing that I cannot bring into the film is the actual slaughter and skinning of these animals. So no matter how, the fur industry wants us to believe that there is a humane way to do this business, it's actually so horrific and violent that I cannot show these images to a wide public. And of course, if anyone wants to have access to these images, I can make them available. Please get in touch. It will be available for free upon request. But this is something that is really absolutely unbearable to watch. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I cannot really share for an obvious reason is the smell. So the smell on these animal exploitation facilities that call themselves fur farms, that are actually very close to factory farms, is absolutely horrendous. You can smell it from a distance most of the time. And for me, it took me multiple washes to try to wash my shoes from this smell, and it took a lot of effort to get rid of it. The thing that I try to show in my images, and one of the things that you notice when you step onto a fur farm, is the individuals. So we are actually confronted with the fact that despite talking about these big numbers and millions of animals, we tend to forget that we are talking about millions of times individuals. And when you are on a fur farm, you are confronted with this reality, and you see that behind each cage there is an individual. And so as individuals, they also have different responses. Most of the animals that you see are absolutely terrified of humans. As someone who would never hurt an animal, this is something painful to see. But at the same time, who can blame them? Because all they know about us is that we hurt them, we cage them. And again, we are the monsters in their eyes. You have animals who have given up, and you can see in their attitude and their behavior that they have completely given up all hope, all wilderness in them. And then you have those who are playful. So you can see animals who want to engage in playtime. And that really reminds you that these animals are really young. At the time of slaughter, at most, they are 8 to 9 months old. So they are just acting like puppies or kittens, and they just want to play with us. But the ones that really stick with me are the ones who fight. There are a lot of animals, actually, despite the fact that they have been born and bred onto these farms that are really designed to tame everything out of them. They have not been tamed. And they are still wild, they are fighting, they fight to their last breath, they try to bite, they try to escape, and they are resisting against the situation they are in. And for me, that's the most painful, because no matter how brave they can be, no matter how fierce they can be, you know that they are born into a system that inherently is designed to set them with no chance. They stand no chance. And so, the fur industry likes to say that they care about animal welfare, that it's really important to them. But by design, the mortality rate on a fur farm is 100% in horrific and atrocious condition. And that is something that we need to really understand. So I'll be very brief. You will shortly see an extract of Slay. So I just want to wrap up with the idea that we live in a world that is filled with both beauty and violence. Some of this violence we cannot do anything about, sadly. We can feel really powerless and helpless. But this is one thing that we can all do something about. And so I'm really here today to support Fur Free Europe and the European Citizen Initiative, because this is a violence we can not only do without, we must do without. The animals deserve better, and we deserve better than to allow this nightmare to continue happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Capelli, for your presentation and also for having been so brave to go behind the scenes of the fashion industry where they like to show us nice pictures. But so thank you very much for this work that you have been doing. And I really have a lot of respect to people who really go on the ground, and you have really been with your team on the ground. So we see now a part of the video that of the movie Slay that you did. Yes.
Fur is the most controversial skin in fashion. Over the last few years, some brands have stopped using fur following pressure campaigns, but many are still using it.
Sustainability has definitely become a catchword in the fashion industry, and there is a lot of greenwashing. It's becoming kind of upsetting in a way because there are so many people doing good works, but the ones who have the most money and the deepest marketing pockets are the ones that are blasting that they're doing good works, when in fact, they're not always doing good works.
Do you care about sustainability?
According to the fur industry, faux fur is unsustainable, chemical and plastic-based, and leaks microplastics into the oceans. Meanwhile, the industry positions animal fur as sustainable, biodegradable, and natural.
Not an artificial chemical material. Real fur is a sustainable resource produced by farms or from a renewable surplus that can be harvested from the wild.
One thing that the fur and leather industry has done really effectively in the last several years is take a debate around what happens to animals used for materials and turn it into a debate about plastic.
The main communication strategy for this multi-billion-dollar industry is to present itself as green. The website furisgreen.com is copyrighted by Fur Council of Canada. Truth About Fur is representing the interest of the North American fur industry and the International Fur Federation. And behind sustainablefur.com, we find Fur Europe, an interest group who spent €500,000 lobbying the European Union in 2019. To understand more, I meet with the CEO of Fur Europe.
The fur industry in Europe, we have about 4,000 farms. That is mink, fox, chinchilla and fin raccoon farms. We produce around 30 million mink skins and fox skins, yeah. My role as CEO is to take care of the interest of my members, to make sure that we promote fur positively, especially in a political context. Natural fur is a 100% natural product and it biodegrades, especially compared to the plastic fur, which pollutes the oceans, pollutes our nature. But also compared to that, the active life of our product is longer than you can see in any other product.
Can we get a little more in the environmental impact?
I cannot give you the figures of what we have exactly of impact now, but we are in the process of getting a full picture.
In reality, based on a study funded by the fur industry itself, only about 25% of a fur pelt biodegrades. And compared with synthetic faux fur, animal fur produces 7.5 times more emissions. On top of that, to prevent pelts from rotting, animal fur is processed using chemicals like formaldehyde and heavy metals.
There have also been studies on human health in association with wearing fur. And in Italy, garments that were intended for babies and children with fur trim showed that these dangerous carcinogenic chemicals were rubbing off on people. And this is an industry that wants us to believe that it's sustainable and natural.
The microplastic argument also doesn't stand. Faux fur doesn't get washed often, and certainly not in machines. It's starting to look a lot like the fur industry is using sustainability as a distraction.
I don't think we can talk about ethical fashion without talking about animals. To me, it's about a value system. It's about how we treat the planet, how we treat people, and animals are part of that conversation.
Is it acceptable to kill animals for fashion?
That is a very big question.
It's very well regulated, the pelting or the killing of the fur animals. It's something that is based on science. One of the big advantages of our sector is that we actually do not transport for slaughterhouses. We do not transport our animals for killing. So when the animal is killed, it's taken right out of its natural environment and put into either for the mink, it's put into a box with gas, or for the fox, it's with electricity. You kill it like that. So it's very humane. It's just outside its environment. It doesn't get stressed. It doesn't get panicked or have a long transport cramped with other animals in an animal transport.
Wait a minute.
And put into it's put into a box with gas, or for the fox, it's with electricity. You kill it like that.
This motion refers to the standard killing method on fur farms approved by Fur Europe. The electric current passes through a fox once one of the electrodes has been inserted in the fox's rectum and one electrode into the mouth, and the farmer pushes an on-off switch. And this is the fur industry's definition of humane.
Another reason they do this is because they need to preserve the fur. So if they were to kill the animals using, say, more conventional methods, that will destroy the quality of the fur because it'll become stained with the blood. And because these methods are so rudimentary and crude, what's been documented several times is that animals are actually skinned alive on fur farms. It's a form of moral insanity that we justify this behavior in any kind of way.
I've not experienced one person that came to a fur farm saying, I don't accept this. I have experienced many people going to a fur farm saying, whoa, is this really what's going on? There are all these pictures and myths about what is going on, but when you actually see it, it's an animal production. The animals are well, they are curious, they are lively. It's just an experience to go and see it. So that would always be my answer.
The RSPCA, which is Britain's leading animal welfare organisation, conducted a survey which showed, I think, just over 85% of the UK public would not actively choose to wear fur. However, what we see is an increasing number of people wearing items such as, hats with pom-poms or key rings with pom-poms or coats with fur trims. They're aware that actually people don't want to buy these items anymore and they're undesirable. And so they've tried to sneak fur back into the marketplace by making it very subtle and very hidden. It's not only, therefore, something that's immoral towards the animals, but actually immoral towards the people who buy these products, because if they knew the cruelty behind it and they'd seen what happened to these animals, they wouldn't want to purchase it.
Over 100 million animals are killed every year on fur factory farms where everything is planned from birth. Babies are born in spring and grow confined in narrow cages. When winter comes and when their fur is fully grown, the animals are then killed and skinned. Some animals are kept for breeding for the next year in a never-ending cycle of birth, cage, and death. To make one fur coat, it takes up to 300 chinchillas, 60 mink, or 15 to 40 foxes. Fur farms exist in European countries, Russia, US, and Canada, but the biggest fur producer in the world is China. I lived in China for 10 years. Here, I am always reminded of the unstoppable pressure of consumerism. The country is ruled by a communist party, but almost everything obeys capitalist laws. With the ever-increasing purchasing power of the Chinese population, the fashion market here is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And the fur industry in China is worth $61 billion, way more than the rest of the world. To fully grasp the scale, I got my hands on a report by Act Asia, a charity educating the public on the fur industry practices.
中国在国际上呢，其实现在是最大的生产国。最大的这个消费国，同时也是最大的制造加工国。在整个的国际市场上呢，在这个拍卖市场里面，中国的买家都是非常具有它的分量的。
One of the major centers for the skin trade is just 1 hour outside of Shanghai. In department stores, entire floors are dedicated to fur for domestic and international sale. Posing as a buyer, I get offered wholesale price for all kinds of fur coats in several shops.
我们其实呢都不应该忽略中国在皮草产业跟它的国际交易上的一个角色，它其实是跟国际有非常紧密的一个关系。其实越大的养殖场呢，很多呢常常是有国际的投入的。比如说在大连的一个很大的养殖场，它已经有高达到5万多只的这个貂，它的繁殖种类呢都是从丹麦他们进口进来，从技术上、设备上呢都是从国外直接引进。所以呢，我们在谈整个的皮草的养殖跟产业的时候，其实已经是一个非常跟国际的连接的一个紧密的概念。
In this shop, I find wolf fur from the US, even though some wolf populations are endangered.
Original wolf.
This is wolf, this is black. 里面你知道吗？全都是毛，对，全都是毛。
There's fur for any budget. For $1.50, you can buy a rabbit keyring made of real rabbit fur. In the back alleys behind the malls, I find raw pelts sold by the dozens at about $40 a pelt.
这些是国产。国产。
刚刚你在外面放的那个是黄毫。
嗯哼。
这是进口的美洲毫。
里面毫子、玻璃水貂都有的。
所以很多人他在买这些产品的时候呢，是无意识的，甚至有20%的人不知道啊，原来我买的皮草里面是含有动物的成分存在的，是皮草动物。
是芬兰还是？
那个是芬兰。
芬兰。
对。
那这个皮草动物有可能是来自猫狗，也有可能它是来自野生动物。
都有区别还是？
一张跟它都养的这个吧，一张跟一样，它都不一样，跟人一样，长得都不一样的，它不是说这个同一个，它就是都是大型犬，这都是差不多，就是。
你看，你说这个是野生，那你怎么买？有关系啊？
你就是那便宜啊，230了。他说我
These are wild caught, and it's a protected species.
这一条条疤上，有的疤一看
100有几条
？30条以上。
你看到的那些在市场上一条一条的这个皮挂在墙上，放在地上，这些都是活生生的生命。
After Haining, I can't stop thinking about the animals. Back in Shanghai, a local activist shows me where all these pelts are coming from.
当我们在谈很多动物的议题的时候，常常你会觉得从一支视频，或是说从报道，或是从文字上去认知，一直到你自己到前线、到农场上或市场上去看到这些动物它们的苦痛，是没有办法以文字来去形容，它给人一个很大的真实感。
Shangli is the biggest raw fur market in China, so basically in the world. And it specializes in foxes and raccoons as well. And this is just like 300 of them here. This is just one backyard farm. out of, I don't know, hundreds in the areas, probably thousands. We talk about these big numbers. We talk about 100 million, 120 million animals killed for fur every single year, year after year. But ultimately what it is, it's 100 million times one individual. I used to have a fur coat. It was a blue fox fur coat that I had. I didn't care. I felt like, oh, they're already dead, so I might as well wear it. And I didn't understand that because I was buying it, then they were living this life and they were killed for me. I didn't understand that. Yeah, I know. He makes the same noise as my dog. When my dog is upset, or like he feels like there's someone at the door, he would make that kind of noise.
当我看到皮草动物被屠宰取皮，整个的过程里面呢，其实伤心跟自己的难过是无法去叙述的。常常呢，在很多天之后，甚至很多年之后，这些影像呢，都不断会浮现。
When I think about the animals, those individuals who are sitting confined in small wire cages, who evolved for millions of years to run and explore and swim and play, and they are spending their entire lives confined to a small space. When I think about the anguish and the horror that they experience, it makes me wonder, what's it going to take for us to be able to move beyond this?
Sorry. No worries. Oh, shit. Yes, thank you very much again.
Thank you. And I want to say that this is the appropriate human response to this issue. I think we can be very proud of following science, facts, and information, but we also need to take into account our emotional intelligence and our feelings when it comes to making the right decisions. So thank you for, I mean, this is, again, the normal human response, and yeah, thank you.
Sorry for that, but yeah, I just say now in front of all of you, if once again there's an exposition on fur in this house, I will not support it again. I can tell you that. Just, I say it in front of you. And I hope somebody outside is also hearing it. I will not support it again. Okay, let's go to the next presentation, and thank you very much again, and sorry for my emotions, but sorry for that. I will give the floor to Professor Algers, who will inform us about the behavioral needs of mink and foxes in the fur industry. You have the floor. Sorry.
Thank you very much, and I would really thank the organizers of this meeting for inviting me to speak here, and I'm really happy that you have taken this initiative, and my role here is to speak about behavioral needs of mink and foxes in the fur industry. And next slide, please. I'd like to next slide again, yes. Remind you what the European farm animal welfare legislation requires is that when an animal is continuously or regularly confined, it must be given space appropriate to his physiological and ethological needs in accordance with established experience and scientific knowledge. Next slide, please. So, what is an ethological need? Well, it's a behavior which is in the animal's nature to perform. It has evolved to have a function relative to the survival of the animal over thousands of generations. It's motivated by stimuli in the external environment and or for internal needs, and we call it a behavioral need. In most domesticated animals, these natural behavior are still present, even if they physically look different, the animals. Next slide, please. The Danish researchers Jensen and Pedersen wrote about ethological needs, that they are to identify those behavioral patterns that represent ethological needs. The important questions are, firstly, how strongly motivated are behavioral patterns believed to represent ethological needs? And secondly, how do we best provide an outlet for those behaviors? Next slide, please. Motivation is often triggered by internal factors such as physiological and genetical components. For instance, drinking behavior or nest building behavior in sows. Next slide, please. Typically, internally motivated behaviors are, for instance, dust bathing in hens, nest building in pigs, and grazing in cattle. And if those are prevented, behavioral phenomena appear, such as wing flapping in poultry, pacing, bar biting in sows, and tongue rolling in cattle, all being behaviors that are not seen unless the normal behaviors are hindered. Next slide, please. So the consequences of not being able to perform highly motivated behaviors are stress reactions, which also could result in behaviors like helplessness or hopelessness, and thwarted behavior such as stereotypic behavior, which we saw some in the film we just saw, and also sometimes injuries. Next slide, please. Stereotypical behavior is when the animal is caught in the preliminary phase of the behavior and performs it repeatedly. With the stereotypy is when it's fully developed, the animal continues to show it, even if the environment changes. In principle, there should be a zero tolerance of behavioral stereotypies. These are signs of an environment that is not appropriate for the animal and its biology. Next slide, please. So the occurrence of behavioral stereotypies should be regarded as an indicator of poor animal welfare, also for those animals in the same environment not showing such behavior. They just might show hopelessness. The study of behavioral stereotypies is also important to know. It's not just a walk-in check, and I'll come back to that later, but a precise study of behavior as a result of understimulation. Therefore, we need a very thorough methodology to assess the true occurrence of behavioral stereotypies. Next slide, please. In a Swedish study where such a thorough methodology was applied, it showed that 59% of the caged mink showed stereotypies, and they spent about 10 to 12% of their active time during winter performing these stereotypies, which is about 2.5 hours a day. And could you please run the video? Could you please to function according to biological principles. Next slide, please. So, when we speak about foxes and mink, they must be able to perform behaviors for which they are strongly motivated. And then the questions are for foxes, digging, and for mink, swimming. Next slide, please. It's been argued that species-specific needs of foxes is to dig, but there are very few studies published on the need for digging in foxes. Why is that? Because there are researchers that do research on foxes kept for fur. But their research is usually sponsored by the mink industry, and very few studies are done to actually assess the appropriate natural behavior of these animals. A Finnish researcher, Koronen, performed a study on digging, and he reported that as early as the first study day when the foxes were given access to a dirt ground, there were clear signs of digging, and the digging sites were concentrated below and close to the nest boxes and the pen walls, and about 20% of the enclosure was affected by foxes digging. Next slide, please. They are motivated to dig, and please run the video. Clear goal. Next slide, please. Koistinen in Finland used an operating conditioning test to see if foxes were willing to work for access to a dirt floor, and showed that blue foxes are motivated to work for access to such resources. Next slide, please. What about mink? Are they motivated to seek prey in water? Could you please run the video? Because if you have seen mink doing stereotypies in their cages, you should also see mink, how they behave in nature. So they choose areas close to water to look for prey. And this is their natural habitat. They are very good swimmers, and they really look for fish or other type of crayfish or whatever they can find. And they are very good hunters, and they live in shallow holes close to the water areas. This is the natural behavior of a mink, the behavior for which they are highly motivated to perform. Next slide, please. There are also for mink very few studies looking at the behavior of mink under such natural conditions. But a study by Schwarzer and colleagues, next slide please, showed that when they kept mink in groups with access to lots of space, to feeders, nipple drinkers, nest boxes, but also a pond, a creek, and a pool. They chose to use those water areas a lot during the day. Next slide, please. This is just from their study showing how much time they spent at or in the swimming pool, the creek, or the pond. And as you may be able to see here, they used a lot of time in those areas. Next slide, please. The authors concluded that the animals in their study generally accepted all the 3 water basins and used them extensively from the beginning to the end of the study. And they concluded that a swimming basin can be considered to be an important enrichment factor for American mink. I also should add that the mink they used in their study were mink that they had purchased from a mink farm. So those mink were used to be in a cage. As it could be expected, they also concluded due to the large and fully enriched housing conditions, it was possible to keep young mink in groups with free access to swimming water basins without the occurrence of any stereotypies, which means that that environment corresponded to the behavioral needs of those mink. Next slide, please. So, I would like to conclude for you that recent scientific research demonstrates that the behavioral needs of foxes and mink cannot be met in cage systems as required by the EU Farming Directive. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Algers, for your presentation. So based on very scientific facts that shows that we are not coherent with our own regulation regarding animal welfare. So definitely it needs to change and to change now. I give the floor to Pascal Durand because he has to leave a bit earlier, but he has a question before we come to the minister, to the Austrian minister. Pascal.
Merci beaucoup, Tilly. Je tiens à te dire à titre liminaire.
Well, thank you very much, Tilly. First of all, I must admit that your tears moved me more than many a scientific article. And just looking at those animals turning around in cages, I mean, all of this, thank you for your humanity in chairing and your way of chairing this intergroup. And this holds true for the documentary as well. We have to defend animals' rights and of course, respect human beings suffering as well. Now, just a question, Professor. Now, I know that the fur industry has developed a number of labels and various types of certification procedures, self-certification procedures. So could you explain what these labels are all about, and what about these scores? What do they mean? And could you explain in detail what these labels are all about and what they are designed to do, whether they be scientific or pseudo-scientific? Thank you very much.
Okay. So I can talk about this. We're talking about certification schemes like Furmark, for instance. So the development, obviously these industries know that they are, being weak. They are being weakened, that the consumers want something else. And instead of, they don't want consumers and people to focus on the animals. So instead they are going to place the debate on traceability, sustainability, etc. So if you look at their communication, it's really textbook, and they will communicate on, developing these schemes to make the consumers and people relaxed about their choices. So these schemes actually do not mean anything for the animals. What it means in terms of Furmark is they are trying to prove that there is a traceability, that the skin comes from a farm that enforces some good animal welfare. But again, we are talking about an industry that inherently is designed to cage the animals, and to slaughter them when they are just a few months old. So these certificates, these certifications actually do little when it comes to I mean, the animals are still being slaughtered at a fraction of their lifespan. They are still being caged. And again, it's also very hard to enforce because in my experience is when anyone shows up to an animal exploitation facility, 100% of the time you will find some breaches of whatever certification or law that is in place. So when we look at these certifications, I think we need to keep in mind that they are designed by those who are profiting from keeping consumers in the dark.
I will also give the floor maybe to Professor Algers on this if he wants to intervene. And just to the MEP, I would be happy, we're running after the photograph so that we can make the picture then after the answer of Professor Algers, the picture all together against her. Professor Algers, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, when it comes to the European fur industry, they have this welfare scheme, animal welfare scheme, and they often refer to that. And that scheme is made from another well-known animal welfare scheme called welfare quality, which was made which was produced over many years with lots of European animal welfare researchers involved. I was one of them, and what that was to try to elaborate a scientifically based animal welfare assessment for animal housing, where a number of principles like good feeding, good housing, good health, and appropriate behavior were looked upon using a number of criteria. I'll just mention a few. For instance, when it comes to good feeding, absence of prolonged hunger or absence of prolonged thirst. Or when it comes to appropriate behavior, expression of social behaviors, expression of other behaviors, a good human-animal relationship, for instance. And then under that, a lot of indicators that were measured. So all this was brought together in numbers, and it ended up in a sort of value for the farm on which welfare level it is. And I must say that it is a system that is scientifically based, but what it does is that it ranks farms. It does nothing else than that. So it's a way for farmers to see where they are in relation to other farmers when it comes to welfare. It does not relate to individual animal welfare. It is on group level, whereas all animal welfare legislation is on individual level.
Professor, I'm going to be very impolite, but I know that the photographer has to run, and I want to take a picture with all of you. When I say all of you, really all of you in front of here, and then we are coming back to you if you want to add something, and then we have also a video message coming from the Minister of Austria. So please gather around here in front so that we can make a picture all together. Thank you, and thank you for the photographer to come back. It was a little bit my fault, but I was, yeah. I don't know, Professor Algers, if you wanted to add something, maybe, or if you were finished.
I just wanted to add one thing,
Yes,
and that is relation to the welfare program and behavioral stereotypies, because the welfare program's methodology to assess behavioral stereotypies severely underestimates the true occurrence of such thwarted behavior. I've seen that in various mink industry reports. They speak about a low level of behavioral stereotypies, but it's not measured according to appropriate scientific methodology in the welfare context. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you again very much to you, Professor Algers, for your response to that. We come back to question and answers also after the video message. So now let's see the video message that we have from the Austrian Minister of Social Affairs, Health, Care and Consumer Protection. So he was sorry that he couldn't be there in person today with us, but he sent us this video message in order to support the European Citizens Initiative. So if we can watch it, please.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the European Parliament, dear NGO representatives, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to address one of our biggest animal welfare issues, fur farming. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend the event in person. Animal protection is a central concern to Europeans. We know from many polls that citizens of the EU don't want animals to suffer unnecessarily. That is exactly what fur farming means. Millions of animals, such as minks, raccoon dogs or foxes, are being kept for the sole purpose of killing them for their fur. I believe this practice is cruel, unnecessary, inhumane, and should therefore be put for the rest. Such a ban would be a big step in the right direction. Additionally, I would not only benefit the animals, I would also support human and environmental health. In my role as Minister of Health, I strongly push towards the realization of the One Health approach. That means we have to take a human health, animal health, and environmental health as an interlinked issue that strongly impact one another. How does this relate to fur farming? The COVID-19 pandemic is a good example. Not only human beings are can catched by the coronavirus, other animals such as we can do. They can serve as intermediate hosts for various pathogens, including zoonotic pathogens. With viruses quickly spreading across the animals in fur farms and often mutating fur farms can also significantly increase the risk of new virus variants emerging. This poses a significant threat to human and animal health. I am convinced that we will have to fundamentally change the system of animal exploitation to avoid future pandemics. In other words, the fewer animals we keep in small, cramped cages, the fewer antibiotic agents we use, the better for everybody's health, the health of humans, animals, and the planet. This is why I wholeheartedly support the European Citizens Initiative for a Fur-Free Europe, and I want to ask you to support it as well. If you think that a ban of fur farming is illusionary or impossible, think again. Austria's last fur farm closed in 1998, and fur farming has been banned in 2005. Since then, we have made progress. There are now 16 EU countries that have outlawed this practice, with Latvia and the newest member of the club welcome. Of course, we cannot simply stop there. The EU must use its power and also close the EU market to farmed fur products from outside the EU, just like we have done with products from certain trapping methods, seal products, or cat and dog fur. As European Union, we should send a clear message. Our internal market, our rules, and those rules should say no sale for farmed fur producers here. In order to shape these rules and to improve animal welfare standards, Austria is actively campaigning for a ban on fur farming in the EU. Among other things, we together with the Netherlands asked the Commission to put forward such a proposal. We have made considerable progress, but we are not there yet in order to make progress and live up to our moral standards and the responsible treatment of animals as sentient beings. I strongly urge all of you to support this common cause, support the citizens' initiatives, and make this step possible towards the goal of a fur-free Europe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much to the Minister Johannes Rau from Austria. So that is what we really need also now from the other member states. Clear statements against fur, that's what we need now. So I open now the floor for questions and debate, so don't hesitate. And Michel is the first. Oh.
Am I really the first one? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very important event. It's always difficult to watch these pictures, but it's very important that we are well informed about the situation. And speaking about that, I'm very happy to see the trend that was presented to us, that there is a significant drop in the number of ewe farms around Europe in the last decade. But still, I'm not sure that this actually means that the situation is improving, especially when we see the situation in China, where the industry is definitely on rise. And we see, well, the international trade being really like thriving, quite nice numbers. So I wonder whether this trend in dropping of the numbers is also reflected in the drop of demand or in the drop of the sales, whether we have such statistics in Europe and whether we see that really the citizens are actually on the right way not to accept fur when buying their clothes. And just to add on, I am very pleased and very proud to announce that Slovakia just hit its threshold on the national level regarding the petition just yesterday. So we are also on the right route, and let's not stop there. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Michel. Do we have statistic numbers on the decrease of the demands, knowing that sometimes now false fur is called false fur, but indeed it's real fur. So it's what do you have, Ms. Capilli, maybe figures also on the demands, or does somebody has around here?
So it's definitely on the decline in the West, including in China as well. So there is a decline of the production. There's a decline that obviously is correlated to the sales. I don't know if we have absolute numbers, but we do have numbers of brands that are, ditching fur and banning fur from their collections. We are also working behind the scenes to engage actively with brands, with fashion organizations, and with, for example, fashion weeks and fashion professionals. And I will leave to Emma if she has something to add. Emma Hackenton from Collective Fashion Justice may have some data about this.
Thank you. So the first thing I would note is the presentation that was presented earlier, which was really fantastic, had the map of Europe and the surveys showing that the vast portion of European countries and people within them didn't want to buy fur anymore, and that's a valuable insight to have. There's also mention to the fact that 69% of the top 10 most luxury profitable fashion brands have all banned fur from their collections. There are still a few that are left. Fendi, for example, is one of them. They previously were a furrier, so they have huge interest in the industry, but the shift is going away from fur both at a consumer level but also at the industry level. We're talking with places like Milan Fashion Week and people that have had really historical love for wearing fur that are looking to move beyond it. Kering is a huge fashion brand. They've now banned fur. I think absolutely the trend is that it's going out of fashion. Thank you.
Just to respond on the mislabeling, yes, there is some mislabeling happening sometimes, but I think in terms of faux fur, there's been also a lot of great developments on faux fur that is partly bio-based and becoming more and more sustainable and, of course, very transparent. So I think we can become more confident in the future in terms of what alternatives are available to us. So despite the fact that it is on the decline, we're still talking about millions and millions and millions of animals. And I think we should all aim for that number, at least in Europe, to be 0.
If I may add to that, so the European Citizens Initiative is not only aiming at banning the production of European fur farming, but also banning the placement of farm fur products on the European market, because as we also saw in the documentary, a lot of fur products are still hidden, and that's why still consumers are buying it without really knowing it. So we need the two to go in parallel. And Tilly, I have great news, because I just heard that the ECI has passed the threshold of the 7 countries for which we need the signatures, so we are on the right way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Yes, as you know, so an ECI needs, we need 7 different countries. We need more than 1 million signatures. The best is at least to have 1.4 million, because there are always some signatures that are not valid. So that's already good news for this morning, and we need them. Other remarks, questions, Francisco wanted to say, and then I have also another
Yes,
remark.
thank you. Well, my question is directed to the director. We saw 2 different realities, but I would assume that there are also differences in making the investigation. We tend to feel that we are very free in Europe, but we have private property, so I would feel that you will have some difficulties entering these factory farms. But in China also, because you have the Communist Party, probably this is a huge market. Probably no, it is a huge market that has the support of the Communist Party. And so how did you manage to get into this, if we don't enter in details, obviously for security reasons, but as a journalist, and also I would say that you have a team by your side, how could you enter these industries, these farms? What were your main difficulties? You talk about 3.5 years of investigation. Obviously, this was not only on field, but I would assume you have a lot of travels, a lot of restrictions, probably some organized crime or some type of organized groups that were pushing against your investigation, or at least they could understand that you were doing some investigation. So I would try to understand what were the main difficulties, and if also in Europe you see there is a lack of institutional responsibility, because the institutions in a way or another close their eyes, don't make the necessary arrangements to make the fiscalization of these industries. So how is your perspective on these issues? Thanks.
Sure, thank you for your question. For the production of SLAY, I've worked with a number of activists and investigators in a number of countries. And some of these people are taking immense risk to make sure that these images are becoming available to us. Because in some cases, investigators and journalists are actually being criminalized, and showing the truth can be, prosecuted, which is a different debate and a different issue, but an issue nonetheless. So for obvious reason, I cannot disclose how we got access, but anyone willing can get access. And I think once you have access, and it's often at random, so we do not target a certain farm thinking, okay, this is a bad farm, let's go get bad images from a bad farm. It's really always at random. And as I said before, 100% of the time when we show up somewhere, we will find something bad, and we will find breaches, we will find anything that is not enforced, and we will find that there's a lot that I couldn't put in the film because it's more graphic. You will find dead animals in the alleys. Actually, the kind of murky like porridge on top of the cages is not feces, it's the food. It's the feed that they are fed, right? And that's the same that I see in China or in Europe. So I cannot disclose too much about that, but what I can say is that Yes, in Europe, if you go to even the fur trade show that is happening in Milan, and you walk around and you feel a little bit the ambience and the people who are attending, the owners, I think these people should be investigated, and I can bet that you would find in their activities, you may find more than just fur farming.
Then I have Anja Hausekamp. You wanted also to ask a question or a remark? No? I have. Otherwise, then I have Petras. I give you the floor for the working group afterwards then.
Thank you, and thank you for organizing this interesting debate and a short screening of the film. Probably we have to think about a kind of tour around Europe. I mean, screening your documentary and having some public discussion, inviting politicians. I mean, who are sensitive, probably even against, but I mean, organizing public debates and visiting some farms. I mean, in Lithuania, we still have some fur farms. There is a law, I mean, a draft law introduced as 2026 must be the deadline for having this business. We might advance as much as possible, but I'm looking forward, I mean, for our cooperation, because we have very vocal NGOs against those, brutalities and atrocities against animals in cages, and I'm looking forward for this kind of our entertainment. And secondly, probably we have to approach those remaining fashion houses which use fur. We can send a letter and to make it public. I mean, they're afraid of publicity much more than losing 5% in their income, because it might, hit them with 20 or 30% of down road. I mean, maybe we have to organize our joint letter, kindly asking them, I mean, to follow the example of those who already did it and survived somehow financially and in a fashion market. So let's do it. I mean, let's make things more public and present good examples and ask them kindly to follow.
Thank you. So I myself, I am based in Zurich, and I make myself available if you need me at any kind of event, presentations, meetings. And I'm working very closely with Collective Fashion Justice when it comes to engagement with brands. And so we're happy to support any of your efforts.
Thank you very much, and I still wanted to say it. So the documentary, please show it in your constituency, show it around, it's available. I think we have to do that, and I'm wondering if we should not make, I spoke about this famous exposition that was 2 years ago on fur in the European Parliament. When I said support, I think it's not the right word in English. I will not endure it anymore. I will not tolerate it anymore, because I never supported it, of course, but supporter in French means endure it. So I think we have to be clear there, and we should make another exposition showing the movie and showing around, and I'm totally supporting also that letter, but please use Slay the documentary also in all your countries to show it around. And I have there a question, Annika, please.
Merci Tilly. Je voulais réagir à ce qui vient. Thank you. I just want to react to what was talked about with social media. There's a lot of organization around animal welfare. There are people learning things that they didn't know before about how the animals are captured, how they are killed. And that means that there's pressure on a lot of fashion houses. And I would like to say that 90% of fur used in the world comes from Chinese farms. And oftentimes those are on skinning of live animals. So in these fashion houses that have given up fur, there are these fashion houses that have given up fur, but what we can do is really focus on banning fur on the European market. And that means that other fashion houses will be able to follow that example without fear of losing their edge on competition. A number of people already mentioned this. COVID is also an example of how things like this can be very difficult. Pollution is also an issue in this industry. The substances that are used in treating the skin can be carcinogenic. Tanning substances, for example. And in developing countries, these have caused a great deal of diseases. And it's true that this human hygiene health aspect may be a more pressing argument than animal welfare.
Ça rappelle vraiment aussi des éléments essentiels. C'est nocif aussi pour.
Was an important point to be made because there can be all these problems in terms of human health. Now, I was rather surprised about an opinion poll in France. I think that there were over 50% of consumers against fur, and that was a fairly low figure compared to other countries. So that's all the more reason for showing the documentary in France, because I think that this opinion poll was the lowest one of all.
Go ahead, please.
Oui, alors moi je suis le mauvais français.
Well, I'm the bad French person here. Now, as you know, since last year, fur farming has been banned in France. The last one had just closed, but there is a big lobby. But there are quite a few countries that have tried to ban fur farming. And what is important to realize is that products that come from these types of farming and these types of farms still, if you ban that, then you might run counter to WTO rules where they say that you can't do that. There are the rules in 2017 that ban dog fur and cat fur. Sealskin is another ban. So if you look at the initiatives that certain member states have taken, you can see that you can align something across all member states without running counter to WTO rules, which could be an issue. So thank you to everyone, and thank you to MEPs who are committing to this. Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. I think time is getting away from us here, so if I don't see any other requests for the floor, I just wanted to say I saw that in the report, this is a question for the filmmaker, that people are finding a way to raise awareness about animal welfare, and fur companies are doing the same thing. So is there a way of attacking this at the root? In Asia, for example, is there a way of promoting this to children? Well, we did talk about this in the film with Athesia, which supports education in China on this topic. So there are activists doing this, but it isn't easy, especially in that particular country. So there is work being done, but there's a lot that remains.
I'd like to just say that the extract that you've seen, we can make it available, and we can work with people from different countries. We already have the subtitles available for French, Italian, Spanish, but anyone can also get in touch so we can make other subtitles available, and so we can just circulate it, and that can support your efforts.
Thank you very much again, Ms. Capilli. I give the last few minutes that we have an initiative coming from Anja Hazekamp to install a working group. But please, Anja.
Yes, thank you, Tilly. I'm trying to be as brief as possible because I know that the interpreters need to go and we need to leave the room. I'm glad to introduce to you the working group on fur-free Europe to you. And we all heard and have seen this morning why it is so important that we ban fur farming in Europe and also the imports of fur products into the European Union. It is cruel, it is unnecessary. Well, I don't need to emphasize that anymore. The idea of this working group was started after the successful launch of the ECI that I participated in the center of Amsterdam a few months ago. And even mink farming, if mink farming is already banned in the Netherlands, we see still a wide interest in the support among citizens for such an EU-wide ban on fur farming. And I believe that the European Citizens Initiative is a very important and strong instrument to make citizens' voices heard. And after the very successful End the Cage Age, that was supported by a working group from this intergroup as well, I think it is time we have a dedicated working group on fur-free Europe as well. I would be very happy to chair this working group and to work together with my dedicated team, with all NGOs, the Eurogroup for Animals, the Fur-Free Alliance. I think it is really important to have a cross-party working group, so I invite all members of this intergroup to sign up for that, and looking forward to end fur farming in Europe and make Europe fur-free. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anja Hazekamp, for this initiative, and I hope a lot of people will join the working group. Just time to thank you all for this excellent presentation, for all your braveness you are fighting, and I'm sure as I'm sitting here, that together we can win this fight against fur and also foster the One Health approach, and most of all, win the fight against all animal abuse that we have, and fur is really one of the very topics that we have to fight in this regard. So thank you very much for being there. Thank you, of course, all for the technical support, for the Secretariat, for all the NGOs. Without them, we would not be there, and we wouldn't have all this footage and all the things that we have. So thank you very much for the NGOs that you are there, and keep on working together, of course. And last but not least, thank you to the interpreters. The next Animal Welfare Intergroup is on the 20th of October. We will talk about the EU chemical strategy and how we can also ensure there more and highest level of protection of animals, also used for scientific purposes. So thank you very much, and take care, and really let's fight for fur in Europe and in the world. Yeah, thank you.